Okay, so let me kind of jump in, and then we'll talk about PolicyMap in general and what the tool does, walk you through all the different features and how to really use them a little bit and understand what they mean. And then from there, we can kind of dig through any questions that might come through. And please use the control panel just to type your questions in. I know longer questions will be a little harder, but just chime in whenever you can. All right, so the tool itself is, our goal of the tool is basically being an online data mapping tool or online mapping tool. Let me just give you just a general sense of who we are so you understand where the data comes from and really where the tool and some of the features you're going to see comes from. That would kind of shape the idea of what PolicyMap does. We were part of a larger parent organization called Reinvestment Fund. They are what is called a Community Development Financial Institution, or a CDFI. All it means is that they are a community bank, and they have a very specific mission, and that mission is to help revitalize low and moderate income communities through some really unique programs like charter schools, grocery stores, affordable housing, as well as community health centers. And we've always worked with them as a tool to use data in a spatial way. So instead of looking at numbers at a zip code or a neighborhood or just an area that you're working in, they wanted to be able to visualize those numbers across the entire neighborhood and really pocket down to an area that might be specifically of use for the work that we do. And we wanted to use that same data to understand the impact of our investments in those neighborhoods. And that's really the genesis of PolicyMap. We wanted to build a tool that anyone then can go to a mapping type platform like a Google Maps or a MapQuest or so and put data on top and kind of understand the neighborhoods better. So it does mean that we have a lot of data. We've been doing this for about 35 years with them. On the spatial side, PolicyMap itself has only been around for 10 years, but the 35 years that we've done data, we've collected a lot of data. And that's one of the biggest resources of our tools, that we've gone out and collected a lot of the data that's out there, either publicly or some really unique proprietary data sets. So this page that I'll send everyone in my follow-up email, the data indicators page, it's a great place just to start to get a general sense of what data you might access within the tool. And the way it works is based on the categories that you're going to see when we go into the platform. So if you wanted to find out some very basic information like income or spending, it'll tell you that we have income for per capita, family income, household incomes, age, people in poverty, and so forth. So it's giving you a broad summary of what's in the income section. The other helpful part of this page, it's going to give you the years that are available for the data sets that are in PolicyMap. So as a baseline in PolicyMap, we start at 2000. We do not go past historically. And then we'll have the most current or most recent data set from that source. So in this case, in the case of household incomes, it's coming from the census. And then we have it from 2000. And then we have the 2 years in between from the census, which is the American Community Survey. And then the other helpful part of this page is the geography that data is available at. So if you are familiar with geographies in general, I'll give you a really brief idea of what geographies look like in the tool. But this is telling you that most of the data in PolicyMap is what we call aggregate data. All it means is that it's been summarized to these really unique geographies, and these geographies are varies from largest to very small. So this table is telling us from left to right, going state down to the smallest block group level. These things are available at the block group, the tracts, counties, zip codes, and so forth. If you're not familiar with block groups and tracts, I'll explain them a little bit when we get into the tool. So it's a lot of data we have in PolicyMap, and when we go into the platform and kind of dig through some of the categories, you're going to see you might get lost in the data a little bit. There's some really neat ways to navigate around that a bit, but the goal of this page is to give you that broad kind of sense of what you're going to find within a category of data. One of the things we definitely learned is that we have a lot of data, and our goal was to really cover a wide range of industries. And so the reality is you probably will use maybe about 40 to 50% of the data in the tool, but there are some really unique categories of data that maybe broadens your ability to better understand a neighborhood or the people that you're trying to address. Okay, so again, in my overview session, okay, use LMI data by C. So low, moderate income data by the census is what you generally use. Okay, so some of the data sets are more federal programs. Do you guys work in federal programs, things like new markets, opportunity zones, CRA eligibility and such? That's a general question for Paul, but Gail, if you know, you can definitely join in.
Oh.
Okay, so you work in CDBG programs. Okay, yeah, so you do work in some of the federal programs that are here. So
Right.
that'll shape me a little bit of how you might use the tool. Perfect, perfect. All right, so then what we'll do then is we really will not have to worry about some of these other features that are here, but we will dig into some of these features that you might use in PolicyMap, tracks and block groups that are 50% or less. Okay, in PolicyMap for your work. That means that the maps, we'll talk a little bit about how to use the maps because this is probably where you're going to spend a lot of your time. All right, so the maps themselves are really simple. The window allows you to click and drag the map around. You can zoom using the zoom bar on the right. You can scroll if you have a mouse wheel as well. So pretty basic stuff. The location bar on the very top allows you to zoom into a neighborhood, and that neighborhood can be either, you can use it like a Google search bar. So you can type in an address. It'll zoom to the address. It'll drop a little pin. And from there, you have the same abilities to pan to different parts of the neighborhood or zoom in and out to get a broader picture of the area that you're in. If you do not have an address, you can just use the search bar as a general geography search. That means maybe you're working in a neighborhood, a city, maybe a metro. You can type in the zip code. It'll draw the boundary for that area and show you where the general boundary for that geography is. So that means you are familiar with block groups and tracks. So one of the really unique features is that you can click onto the map at any time, and it will draw the smallest geography that's in our universe. In this case, it's telling us this address is going to sit within this block group. And then, of course, the track that that block group sits in. You can also search for these geographies as well, besides just the search bar up here, which allows you to type in things like cities and counties and such. The location bar allows you to search for some of the more complex geographies. In this case, if you do work in tracks and block groups, you can search for those individual geographies. Just remember, when searching for tracks and block groups, we need the entire 12-digit FIPS code for census tracts. But if you are searching for larger geographies like congressional districts, Senate districts, or metros, it's just a matter of choosing the state that you're in and then finding the metro that it's at. So the location bar, its goal is to zoom the map to the place that you're trying to work in, either by very specific geographies like an address, city, or state, or using the drop-down menu. You can also overlay, though, some of these boundaries that you're searching for, and that's on the bottom of the maps under Map Boundaries. So this allows you to say, you know what, I want to show the metros in the map, but at the same time, I want to show what the tracks look like within those metros. And so you can make a map that shows both of the boundaries on top at the same time. Probably one of the most used feature for you then, if you are working in these type of data, is the ability to make your own boundaries. So again, the search bar is going to zoom the map to the place that you're in. The boundary is going to overlay those boundaries. But if you want to make your own boundaries, we call them custom regions in PolicyMap. And there's a couple of unique ways to get to them. You can obviously just click on Create, and there's 3 ways to make a custom region. The draw feature is just that. It's the ability to simply just draw on top of the map. So if you read the instructions when you do this, it's going to tell you that when you click OK, your mouse turns into a pointer. We have new updates all the time. And you're simply just drawing the vertices of a target area. You can pan around, you can zoom in to get closer to the street if you need to. I always tend to draw really complex boundaries when I do these because why not? But the goal of a drawn custom region is you click onto the first point or a point, and it will close your drawn custom region, giving you a chance to see what the area looks like and then give it a name. Oops. So a drawn custom region in PolicyMap is pretty unique in that it doesn't care about any of the underlying boundaries that we have in PolicyMap. It doesn't care that you cross city lines, county lines, metros, and so forth. It will care about them if you want to make a report for it or download data for it. So maybe you want to figure out all the tracks within this area. And what it does is it uses a really simple 50% coverage rule. Basically saying as long as 50% of that geography or that track sits within your boundary that you drew, it's going to be used in aggregation or in your reporting for that area. So that way, in this case, this track here is going to be covered, and most of all these are actually within my drawn custom region. But if it crosses a track or a block group, but less than 50%, then it's not going to be used within the reporting or aggregation. So on the other side of that means that you probably do have geographies that you need to assemble or put together tracks and block groups. And so we do call it the Assemble Custom Region feature. So this, when it clicks OK, it will default to the geography that we're currently zoomed into. In this case, it's census tracts. We can use this menu up here to choose other geographies. So while you can make small assessment areas like block groups and tracks, you can also use the metros or counties to make larger regional areas that you want to identify in your creations. So in this case, we can use tracks, and you're simply just clicking onto the geographies. You make a mistake, you can deselect a given area. You can also make non-contiguous census tracts. So in the case of some of the really unique federal programs, some of the tracts don't always touch. For whatever reason, they don't really care. But in this process, you can make boundaries that do not touch each other then, of course. My typing is really bad on Tuesday morning here. So now we have a drawn custom region, an assembled custom region, and the radius is pretty easy as well. It's just simply a circle around a given point. Custom regions in PolicyMap are pretty unique. I mentioned that you can get a report for it, you can download data for it, and they're based on these icons along the border. The X will remove it from the map, whereas this red icon will give you a couple of really unique customization to your boundary, meaning you can do things like changing the color, filling it in. So if you want to show the areas that you're working in comparable to other areas that you're working in. You can also take your custom region and put it into some of these other features that we'll talk about in a moment in PolicyMap, which is tables. You can get a report for it. The big ones is you can download data for this. So if you want to get all of the eligible census tracts within this custom region, which I'll show you because I think that's pretty important in your work, you can use the download data function to do just that. Or you can put this custom region into another user's account, allowing them to access the boundaries that you're working in. So that way, everyone's working on the same page pretty much when it comes to these very unique boundaries that you're drawing. When you do create a custom region, it will appear in this menu. Next to the Create button. And as you can see here, I can delete, re-edit, share, everything I can do on the main icon as well. Or I can also see where other users have put custom regions into my account. Okay, so let me just remove this. So once you kind of have your data on the map, you're zoomed to the area that you're working in, the next step as you're trying to get data, that's really above the map here. So these are all the categories that I mentioned in the very first tab. we have some basic demographic data, but I think in your case, you're going to go to the very far tab, which is federal guidelines. And so in here, we will have a lot of CDBG datasets. These are pre-calculated, so things like eligible block groups are pre-calculated for that 50% or less of AMI. If you actually just want to see AMI calculations, we do have current income levels. I really don't know how often the federal government really cares about current income AMI calculations. We do find out that they use older data sometimes. But in this case, this will give you a very simple map that shows all the block groups that are in my custom region I drew that are considered eligible for CDBG eligibility. If you're looking for LMI again, I believe this is just also by income. These are yes or no answers. So this is people, areas of low income threshold. This is the fiscal year 2015. So once the data is on here, you can do a couple of things. The title is going to tell you exactly what data this is. So this is the percentage of the population below the area low income threshold. If you're not sure, this is exactly what's going to give you that explanation. So this is that 50% value that you're looking for. And so the legend is going to tell you what geography is being shown. In this case, it's census tracts. It's telling you that this is the percentage of population that's below that 50% range, but you probably really just want the number of people. So if you change the variable to number, this will actually change the data itself. So now you'll get the number of people in your drawn custom region that are below that 50% threshold for CDBG. And so from this, we can, let me just remove this fill, or fill it and just reduce the transparency. So from this, we can show a map that has our boundaries that we're working in, the areas that we're working in, and maybe we would just want to get a total number of people in my custom region that I drew that are below the number of people under 50% of the threshold. So you can do a couple things. You can, as I mentioned, click onto this, and if you click on to download data, it'll go through the process of downloading data, which is also this icon up here as well. So both do the same thing. So in this case, this is going to go through the process that's saying we're going to download the number of people below that threshold of 51% or less. And we're still within my region, but you know, we want to use just my custom region. So we're going to choose custom region over here. The default geography is census tract, so it's going to download every census tract in my drawn custom region, and then give me the number of people in each one of the tracts that are below the threshold. So one of the really neat things with the download feature is I can generally talk long enough and the file will trigger, but the file itself is done fairly quickly, but it takes your browser to refresh. So you can either just refresh the browser or just click on the Maps button and it'll automatically refresh the browser. It's a really weird thing with internet browser and how download works. But in this case, this will be my file, and you'll get 3 columns at first. The second and the third column, it's only if you want to use this data in another spatial tool, if you wanted to remap this somehow. These 2 columns are used just for that goal. Otherwise, you can delete them because you'll probably never really use them then. And then now you have every column, every census tract in my drawn custom region, and then the number of people in each one of those tracks that are below the threshold. And then from there, of course, because it's in Excel, we can just do a very simple formula and give us a total number of people in my drawn custom region. All right, let me take a quick pause. Hopefully that gives you kind of a general idea of how to go one route and answers hopefully one question that you're looking for with the tool. Is there any other questions any questions about that so far? Okay, let me kind of add a little bit about LMI, so that way if there is a use for current day calculations for low mod calculations, we do create them as a part of the PolicyMap tool. It's a little bit different because it's under income and spending. So the categories themselves, what we try our best to do is put data in a category that makes sense, but a lot of times you just want to use this search bar up here. You should be able to type in things like low mod. I'm just going to make a wild guess here. There we go. So it will try to do a little bit of calculation or a little bit of word search. In this case, it's going to do, it'll show you the low mod calculations for current year ACS data. Again, this is one of those things where I'm not sure how often federal programs use current year calculations, but at the very least, for a lot of our users, this gives them more current year numbers to reference against maybe what they're applying for at that time program. So in this case, this is much different. So this is the total number of, these are all the tracks that fall within that percentage. So the one neat thing about the legend for this is that instead of looking at 5 different ranges, your goal is to really look at that 51% or less, right? So if you click onto the range feature here, it'll release all the fields, allowing you to make your own values and even your own cuts. And I can say, you know, I just want 2 ranges, and I want that range to be 51%. And so that'll be an easy way to kind of represent that. So on the, if we look in the inverse of the math that we looked at before, this place has actually changed a lot because only a handful of tracks that are left. If we continue on some of the federal programs that use LMI or AMI calculations, there are, I mean, this is total persons, this is median income persons, and so forth. So these are all the eligibility programs for that in particular. One of the other more unique features then is, if we put our custom region back on, besides downloading the data just for that particular area, we can also then take this into the reports and just get a general demographic kind of capture of the people in that area as a whole. So if I click on a generate report, it'll take us to this report section. Reports in PolicyMap are probably a much more traditional way that you've seen data, which is in charts and tables and so forth. The reports in PolicyMap are pre-built, so you don't have the ability to customize reports. But what we've built around each report is very similar data sets together. So the main one you're probably going to use is the community profile report, but you might use the rental housing report as well if you're looking at fair housing data. So let me just pull up the community profile. Some of these variables will be more familiar with you right off the bat. So we sometimes call this report a snapshot of life in a given area. And what the goal is to kind of give you a broad picture of what our people are living in this area, but then what the community of those people look like. So it starts out with things like some general stuff like Senate and congressional members and state legislative members that are actually covered by this district. So you can see some of the really crazy boundaries that overlap these areas. But then you see the general population number. So what the data was in 2000, what it was in 2010, what it is in 2017, which is the most recent ACS that came out in December, and then the change. So it's a very slight change, but its comparison to the county is pretty dramatic. Whereas the county has increased by 10%, this has decreased by almost 5%. What the population demographics look like, what the age looks like, the total number of household incomes. So it's a pretty diverse, actually, range of income areas. Type of families in the given area, the housing stock, and so forth. Then we get to the community profile parts. The first part is the demographics, talking about the people. And this talks about the vacancy in the given area. So pretty low vacancy in general. A little high for business. Unemployment data. So this is down to the smallest geography available. In this case, it's the county and the metro. There's job types, in the given area, and there's a little bit of crime data from the FBI crime report. So these are all the cities that actually touch my boundary. Oh, wow. So reports are unique, as you can see. The goal is just to give you a broad picture of the people that are in that area and the type of people that are living in. So you can save and print these reports out as well as any other tools in PolicyMap. So the question was, what's under fair housing? This is, I believe, a variety of different index, but also the recap data from HUD, which is racial and ethnic centered areas of poverty. I apologize, excuse me. And again, if you're not familiar with any of the programs that are here, just click onto the description and it'll give you a longer identification of what that means. And the other variables in recap or in fair housing is the index for low poverty. These are a lot of indexes from HUD used for fair housing. The description is probably one of your biggest benefits, especially in the case of working under some of these federal programs, because there are some very specific and unique languages that specify how you get to these values. If you are still not familiar with some of these variables, again, you can always contact me at any time. I can get a data manager in here to really dig further into it, or you can follow these links, which is the source link and the C data directory link here. This will take you to the other link that I'll send to you, and this is the data library page. And so on this page here, this allows you to find out where this data comes from specifically, and then of course, a little bit of description about it, but also a link to the raw data itself. So if you wanted to dig through more about the fair housing variables and the indexes that were created from HUD, this will take you to that section, and you can read all about it as well. Yeah, I think for federal data sets, that's probably the biggest tool to use is our descriptions and the directory links, because there's a lot of very nuances when it comes to these programs in that process. So we do have qualified census tracts, development areas. Like I mentioned, opportunity zones. I don't know if you are looking into those before, but these are that new program from the tax relief bill. I mean, there are some just general data sets if you just want to learn more about just demographics. And again, they're all broken into these categories as well. So demographics will have population, age, income, and so forth. We do have some really unique variables when it comes to demographics. If you are familiar with demographics from the census, what they want to do is generally have you look at one race at a time. So in this case, we have this very two-color map. Let me just fix this a little bit. So again, in the case of the census, let me just remove a layer. They generally want you to look at one race at a time, one age at a time, basically one indicator, as they call it, at a time, without really trying to compare them too much. But we definitely know users really like to compare those types of data sets. And so what we try our best to do is put some of them together. So we make our own indexes sometimes. In the case of race, we made a really cool index, which is a predominant race ethnicity index. All right, this is kind of a cool way for Louisville. I can zoom into a place that you maybe are more familiar if you want, but this is, if you are familiar with Louisville, this is a really unique way to look at it as well. So what this is showing is anything in the green is areas that are predominantly white. Anything in the blue is predominantly black. If there are Hispanics, there we go, there will be the more red colors. So this is a really neat way to look at racial characteristics and really how neighborhoods are sometimes segregated based on different races and how they kind of settled into neighborhoods. One of the really more unique colors for us as we kind of built this layer out is this in-between color, which means in this case, even though black is the predominant race, it is not the majority. So there is this kind of meshing line between neighborhoods that come together in certain areas in that case. It's just a neat map to look at demographics. In the case of income, it is some very, well, let me jump back to demographics real quick. We do have other housing variables. If you want to look at the household types, head of households, we do some really unique studies for early childhood learning. One of the undercounted measurements is grandparents with children, so grandparents taking care of children. And so we kind of pulled this out from the census to put this into PolicyMap. Again, income and spending, pretty basic stuff, things that you're probably familiar with. I do mention that if you are just looking at income in general, household income is the most commonly used income variable. So because of that, the census does break out income into things like head of households, tenure of renters and homeowners, the income brackets, the age groups, as well as poverty data for families. And then I did mention that we do create the low mod calculation. So this is the current year low mods. It's under income and spending, but again, use the search bar on the very top if you want to try to dig through some of those variables as well. Oh, good question. All right. So I love talking about health. So as you can see, there's a lot of very unique categories. And again, it is one of these things where we put a lot of data and we try to cover a lot of different industries, but you probably won't use all the data sets at once. But the big one that we grew up in PolicyMap is our health variables. So with this, when we first launched PolicyMap, there was really only one source, maybe two if we include HRSA at that time, but CDC was really the only source. And so because of the CDC, there wasn't a lot of small geography data. They really had to make sure data was private. And so you could only see CDC data at counties or maybe state levels, and it was really hard to use if you're trying to research smaller communities. But health became a really important factor when it comes to understanding communities, growth, and health in general. And so a lot of federal programs started producing smaller area estimates. And so with that, everything from birth life expectancies to disability data from Medicare. There's uninsured data from the census. The census started adding the question of, are you insured or not, in the American Community Survey about 5 years ago. And so because of that, it is the census. And so not only do you find out if you have insurance or not, it also breaks it out into age, race, income, and so forth. So it's a fantastic way to look at uninsured population. There is Medicare data. So just understand when you start looking at some of these Medicare and Medicaid programs, there isn't small geographies. So you're looking at some of these larger areas. Disabled households, I apologize, I jumped a little ahead there. That's under demographics. And this is a little bit of SSI data as well as the census questions for disability. But in the case of, as I mentioned, Medicare data or any Medicaid data, you're going to find most of this at larger geographies. So in this case, it is the county level. There wasn't a way for us to disseminate that to smaller data. There is a really unique data set in here, which is the risk factor data coming from the census as well. So this gives you a chance to see things like how much people sleep or drink. We do have a brand new data set, which is under income and spending, and that is consumer expenditures. So this allows us to take data from the census. The census asks questions, how much money do you spend on X amount of things? And then they break that out into these really unique categories, and we're able to kind of disseminate that down to smaller geographies. We are expanding this as we produce it. We just released this about 2 weeks ago. But in this case, you can see how much people spend on food, on education, away from home. And again, this is our first cut at it, so we should have more variables as we produce this. So what this is saying is these places here, if we click onto the map, this particular tract, an average a year spends $2,200 on education. And we learned a lot about what this means. But again, it is one of these data sets that if you want to learn more about what was produced and how we got to these variables, this will explain what education represents in this summary. So the maps themselves, as you can see, there's a couple easy ways to use this tool then. You can, as you saw, you can share a custom region with each other. You can download data for a custom region. But if you wanted to share this map with other users, you're going to use these icons in the top right here. And let me just put my boundary back on one more time. The print icon allows you to save this map onto your desktop, so you can email it to another person, copy and paste it into an email, put it into a PowerPoint or a Word document or a website or so, but it's an image of the map that you're working in. And the image, once you pull this up, is fully interactive at this time, meaning you can center the map to where you're working in, zoom in to get this place exactly to the area that you're working in. You know, might not fit in this zoom, so you got to get to zoom out a little bit. Change the orientation based on the size of this area. So you can make the text larger or smaller. You can make it portrait or landscape. Change the format of how you want to use this file. You can add additional text. So if you're working on a very specific program, you can add that text in here, and that way the project is available. You can remove text as well, and so forth. And then, of course, when we have these data sets, we want to make sure you have all the tools around it. So when you are presenting the map, you have all the information about it. So that way you don't have to memorize everything in that process. And then when you save, it just saves a copy onto your desktop, allowing you to use it at any time. Now the maps that you print are static, meaning that it's stuck in time. And so the user gets an image of it, they kind of really understand what the area that you're working in. But if you wanted to share this map in a maybe much more interactive way, you can use the share function up here. And with the exception of custom regions, and proprietary data sets. I apologize. All right, so this is my map that I created. This is the PDF version, so it's a lot more junk around it. But you can see this is what the format looks like, giving you a chance to, again, attach it to an email, copy and paste it into a Word document or a PowerPoint. Let me just put this layer back on. So if I wanted to share this map, let's say I want to embed this link of this map onto an email, a Word document, or a website, the link function will do just that. I can email it to another person. So again, they'll get an email from PolicyMap. You get to type a really simple message telling what it is, but the email will give them some context that has come from the tool. Then our personal favorite feature is the ability to put an embedded map of this onto your website. So if you wanted users to come to your website to be able to pan around a neighborhood that you're kind of focusing them in, the embed feature works just like that. The map is interactive within that window, and they can click and they can drag and so forth. All right, so that's kind of the basics of the PolicyMap interface. There's a couple other features left. Let me know if there's any other data sets that might be of interest, or any questions about what you've seen so far. Does it make sense how you would want to use the tool right now? Okay, sure. Mortgage lending it is. Mortgage and lending is a pretty unique data set for us. This is more CRA and HMDA data sets. So if you're familiar with the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, lending is going to have all those variables related to it. Our calculations for HMDA data is pretty unique in that we actually work with the Federal Reserve Bank to trim out some of the some of these variables that were related to HMDA to really make the numbers more accurate. We do have a methodology that we publish when you pull this up. So in this case, you can see all the different loans through HMDA, everything from originations to piggyback loans, which are the 80-20 loans. This does go back in time, so if you ever want to see what the housing bubble looked like in 2008, you can really put that in here and see what that looked like back then. But it is HMDA, so the goal is to identify or address places that are lending across different races and ethnicities, and as well as income, so you do have the ability to see that. And then we also have CRA eligibility data in here, including small business and farm loans. So that way, if you want to see what small business loans look like in a given area, these are percentage of business loans that are less than 100,000. And then again, with the legend, you have the ability to say, well, you know, I don't want to see what the percentage are. I want to see the number of loans that were under 100,000 in that year. The map redraws, and again, if I put my custom region back on, I can download a list of all the census tracts. Perfect. So all the census tracts that are within my custom region and the number of loans that were under 100,000 within my custom region. Oh, perfect. Yeah, so I mean, the other side of that is also within the CRA eligibility and hub zone data sets as well. So if you do use some of these fair housing indicators, these are variables in here. But yes, yeah, lending will have small business. Well, see, they're already here already, as you can see. This used to be a really great data set from the census, which is the unbanked population, but it hasn't been updated in a while. We're working with a couple of nonprofit organizations that have methodology to update it, but it used to be a really cool data set to work unbanked data. And then on the point side, and I kind of jumped a little bit ahead when it comes to data in PolicyMap, is we have two types of data that you use in PolicyMap, and what I've really shown you today is what we call data layers. That means that the data is aggregated to those block groups and tracks and such. But we do have point level data sets that if you wanted to overlay on top of the map as well. So if you are looking at fair lending trades, you can see where banks are located versus areas that are considered high income and low poverty. So these are point level data sets next to data layers at the same time. So in this case, it does bring up a really good point. Let me show you one last feature, and this might kind of wrap everything together for you, which is we have the ability for our users to add their own data into the platform. So if you wanted to see where, get an analysis of where your investments or your patrons are in an area and see if they're in areas that either qualify for these programs or are in lending areas that are meeting the standards for these programs. We do have the ability for you to upload data, and there's a couple different ways you can do it. And I think at the bank level, because you can anonymize data, this will give you a chance to do that. So let me pull up something really simple here. So loading data in PolicyMap is pretty simple. You're going to use the data loader in the very top here, and the process to load data itself is probably one of the easiest features within the tool because there's only 5 steps, and I'll kind of show you how that goes through. You're going to choose the spreadsheet option. You're going to give it a very easy custom name. You can edit all this at any time, so that way you can come back to it any time. You're going to choose how you want to share it. So initially, I always tell users to use the option of myself only, meaning that only your account and your login can see this data set. But if you wanted to share with other users within the company, then the option is to selected individuals, meaning that you can put their email addresses here, and that way everyone that's on here will be able to access your point data sets. The other really helpful part of uploading a data set is that you are the author of the data, meaning that if you add additional data sets or edit it, it'll automatically be updated to the users that you share it with. And then the icons, which are the same ones in PolicyMap, you can change the colors in the icons, allowing your points to stand out from the current ones that are in PolicyMap. By default, all icon colors in PolicyMap is orange, and so you can use other icon colors to represent things. and then the file itself. And the files in PolicyMap is pretty simple. So we call our data set, I call it a dummy data set or a dummy data loader, meaning that it doesn't look at the data. It doesn't care about the data itself that you're trying to upload. All it wants to do is geocode or find the latitude, longitudes of an address to plot it onto a map, which means that our files only really needs an address, city, state, and zip for the files to work. Everything else you see here is up to you. It can be nothing at all, or it can be as dynamic as you want. And the files themselves can be very large. I know sometimes for institutions, our limits are not always the same, but each file can have up to 10,000 addresses. So that's 10,000 rows of addresses. And each address can have up to 45 columns of data associated to an address. So that's 10,000 by 45. So it's a lot of data each file can have in that process. But once you build this file, and again, if you want to anonymize the data, that means you don't need anything else in here. You can just remove the customer, you put a very simple identifier, so that way it's the general number for that person. But once you have this here, go through the process, find your file. The first page you'll see is a really simple page. You're only going to see it once because it wants to identify those 4 things that I talked about, which is the address, city, state, and zip. If for whatever reason one of these fields isn't up here and it's more likely down here, apologize there, sorry, then you can use this here and say, gosh, this should have been state instead of zip code or instead of just general text. But when you click next, all it wants to do now is just recreate your spreadsheet, but on this web interface, allowing you to do the same things. You can pan through the given areas, you can scroll through, and so forth. But it's going to give you some tips at the very beginning, which is the match rate, telling us that of my 128 addresses, 119 were found. I can click within the address fields here to edit the text or add text if I wanted to. I can sort by the columns just like an Excel spreadsheet. And then probably the most important column to sort by is the very first one. This allows me to group all together all the addresses that failed for whatever reason, giving me a chance to look at them and see what it failed. And then from here, I can type in, change the address. Maybe I typed the address in wrong. And it will geocode the addresses on the fly. And there's a couple of different reasons why addresses fails, and I'll definitely send you some information about the data loader. But once you do that, you'll go from a spreadsheet of addresses to being able to see them on the map. And then once they're on the map, you can click onto the addresses, pan them around and stuff. But the really big important part, this hopefully wraps it all together for you, is you can take it to the maps page and basically make a map that shows of your addresses which ones are in areas that are eligible for CDBG programs. And I can zoom in probably to a much more closer area to make more sense. There is a really unique download function to this. I don't know if I'm going to blow your mind or cover too much if I go that process, but let me know if I can. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how to use the data loader as well as the data that we talked about in today's session. Okay. So I will follow up with an email just to talk about the last feature, which is the download thing. I won't cover it today just because I think we've covered a lot. And hopefully I haven't overwhelmed you too much with some of the things you can do in the tool. Hopefully we've been able to kind of give you some ideas of how you might use the tool in general. But again, if you have any questions, yes, you're welcome to contact me at any time. My information will be in my email, but we do have a support team that you can contact. I'll put that in email as well. But it's info@policymap.com is our general support team. That's our whole group will answer data questions and technical questions on the tool. And again, I'll share this video so that way if you do want to go back and highlight some of the parts that I talked about really too fast sometimes, you're welcome to rewatch it as well. Yes, and you can talk. Yeah, so the question is, can you talk to a live person? Yes. We are happy to jump on the phone to go through anything in particular. If you need very specific help to go through a program, we get a little excited and a little nerdy about walking through those things. So yes, give us a call at any time. Okay. Thank you so much then. Hopefully that gives you some good ideas. And yeah, as always, please contact us when you do have any questions as you go through this. All right. Have a great day. Thanks, Gail.
Thanks. Thank you.